All right. Looks like we're live. All right. Looks like we're back and it's actually working this time. What's up, everybody? I'm Phil. I'm back today with Huguenot. Say hello, Huguenot.
Hello, Huguenot.
Wow. Hi, Huguenot. I'm Dad. We're back with an overclocking live stream today. Today, we are taking a look at the RTX 4070 Ti. Get in here real close, man. RTX 4070 Ti SUPRIM X OC Edition. An absolutely beautiful graphics card, if I must say so myself. So, we're going to keep it nice and short. What happened to our chat? Chat. There we go. Just in case somebody has a good question. So we are going to be using Speedway today. DirectX 12 Ultimate Benchmark for gaming PCs. Last time I did an overclocking live stream, I used TimeSpy Extreme. That has 3 segments. That takes a long time to run it. And one of those segments is a CPU segment. So not exactly what we're looking for anyways. So we've already done a run of Speedway, but we are going to do it one more time. So we can have kind of a base that we are going to overclock from. Oh, and it looks like the rendering resolution by default is 2560 by 1440, even though we didn't notice that. So,
but we are on a 4K monitor here.
Yeah, we brought the 4K monitor down into the basement cave in the middle of finishing it, so we could bring you the overclocking live stream. Let's give it a run here. So one thing we've noticed here, you can come over here, Huguenot. The GPU tends to stabilize around, if you can get right up here to these metrics, exactly. The GPU clock tends to stabilize around 2805, I believe. We're still not actually running, and memory at 10,501. I don't know what the effective speed is for the memory off the top of my head, but I think it's, 21 gigabits per second or in that range, between 21 and 24. Since it is GDDR6X memory here. So there you go, 2805 is our speed. So take a look here. I'll try and tilt this down so it doesn't. You can hear the GPU fan ramping up. Temperatures reaching around 67C average. Our hotspot is up to 78. Okay. We've got GPU board power draw at 270. That is a little bit low. Makes me wonder if we should use the 4K benchmark, honestly.
So the question I had for you earlier was, is there any, when we're overclocking, is there any part of it that is tinkering with the actual hardware itself, or is it all just done through the software?
That's a good question. So in this case, right, we are technically tinkering with the hardware by sending it signals that it should use less power, use more power, or reduce the voltage in order to, gain performance, right? But we're not physically going to touch the card or do anything to the card. Occasionally, you'll see people actually take the cooler off the card and mount a water cooler onto the card.
Okay.
That improves the performance because it's, better than an air cooler. But another thing you can do is you can change your thermal paste and things like that. That'll actually have an effect. But in this case, right, this is the highest end air-cooled MSI model that you can buy for any graphics card. So we're assuming that this is already quite good. And we're just, why would we even buy a super high-end cooler? The answer to that is this card runs cooler than a lower-end GPU, RTX 4070 Ti would, and therefore it should have more headroom for overclocking, right? So hence the overclocking live stream. So let's see here. We have 5,389 graphics score for Speedway. I am going to pull up 3D Mark results. It looks like the same hardware, so 4070 Ti achieves maybe 6,000 points in Speedway. So let's see. 4070 Ti, Probably has a space in it. There you go. And we are on Speedway. So, top score for a 4070 Ti is 6,229 points. That's the top score in the world. I can't tell what that flag is. But Arma Computer, they have been doing a lot of runs with 4070 Ti's. Hey, here we go. So they hold all the records all the way to 25.
So with the overclocking that you're doing here, how many more points are you hoping to squeeze out of this?
Well, we're starting at 5,300, so we're about 1,000 off of the top. I think it would be a great result if we achieved 6,000. Just looking at this, right? But we'll see. I mean, maybe the best we can do is 300 to 500 more points. So hard to say for sure. We won't know until we try.
And if it's even possible to answer this, how do those points roughly equate to performance as far as frames per second when you're in game?
That's a good question. This is a synthetic benchmark, so it's not exactly the same, right, as gaming. Oftentimes, you can achieve higher performance in a synthetic benchmark than you can in a game. So whatever stable overclocking profile we reach here will most likely not be stable in gaming scenarios. So we'll have to take that profile and we'll have to figure out exactly where we need to back off so that you can get that extra 7 FPS on the Witcher 3 remaster with Ray Tracing Ultra. That's what we're here for today. Okay, so we've got our basically 5,400 is our baseline score. Surprisingly, the average for a 4070 Ti is 5,443. So I'm interested in why our card is scoring below average despite being factory overclocked. But we're gonna find out. So coming over here on MSI Afterburner, I'm going to try using this skin. It has different skins for the app. I'm not used to this one, but I've watched some videos recently on that have used this one, so we're going to do that. First thing we're going to do, and that you should always do when you're overclocking, is you should max out the power limit. All right? I believe this is how we apply current settings. Great. So we've maxed out the power limit. Let's do another run. Right off the bat, what we've done is we've told the GPU, hey, use more power. Here's some extra power that you can use. I can make this bigger. It looks like. All right, so this is actually shocking to me, right? My RX 7900 XT only allowed for 15% power limit increase. This allows for 28% increase. That's not a small number. In fact, we're going to check it out over here. Board power draw is up in the 270 watt range, which doesn't feel higher, honestly. We're hitting the same GPU clock. Huh. That's a little weird. It's a short run, though, so let's see if our score actually changed.
So when you're overclocking, what are the different variables? What are the different knobs you can turn to...
Awesome question. Power limit. How many watts is the card allowed to use? Core clock, which is the die, the chip itself. What speed is that going to run at? The memory clock, right? The chip is surrounded by memory modules that kind of save information and relay that information to the chip as needed. That memory has its own clock. So memory clock is another lever we can pull. And then voltage, right? So how much electricity per unit of speed, I guess, is usable. Interesting. We went over 5,400 there, even though I didn't notice a material change in temperatures, GPU, speeds. So I'm not sure exactly what happened there, but let's see here. We need to unlock voltage control and restart Afterburner. There we go. Now we've got core voltage. We can change that.
And as you're pulling those levers and dialing things up, what are you looking at to check those things and know when to stop? Is it primarily temperature, or are there other indicators that's where you need to?
So temperature is an indicator. As you run the GPU at a faster speed, right, it's likely to get hotter. So we are going to keep an eye on our GPU hotspot temperature, make sure that that's in a good range. Although generally, when you undervolt, right, we are not going to overvolt. Commonly, when people think, oh, overclocking is dangerous, that's overvolting, right? Where I'm really telling it, hey, don't just use more power, but you know, ratchet up the temperature, ratchet up the voltage. That's where you can kind of fry your hardware, right? We're actually going to undervolt. We're going to try to see if it can hit the same frequencies while using less power.
Okay.
So that's much safer anyways, but that's going to be a key element to this. That's a huge element of overclocking AMD GPUs, right? By simply dropping the voltage, AMD GPUs they'll start, boosting to higher speeds. So NVIDIA cards don't work exactly the same way, and it's been a while since I've really overclocked an NVIDIA card, so this is kind of the first big attempt that we're going to make here. So, yeah. So my initial thoughts are, I'm wondering why the speed or the power didn't change dramatically. So I think what we're actually going to do is put it on a stress test. So speedway stress test, and we're going to loop this guy. Enable windowed mode. And then we're going to start pulling some of these levers and see what actually causes a change on the graphics card, speed. And we should, if we apply a change here in MSI Afterburner and it works, right? The graphics card takes it and it doesn't crash. We should actually see a corresponding jump. Not a big jump, but we should be able to see an increase in FPS. Just kind of generally. So, selecting system info. This is it rendering at its native resolution of 2560 by 1440, which part of me is honestly wondering if we're hitting a bottleneck on the CPU side here. So let's take a look. Temps are getting to about 66. That's our normal value. Clock is at 2805. Not sure why that's not going up. Board power draw, 275. So I believe the stock power draw for a 4070 Ti is 300 or 2. Let's see. 4070 Ti. Let's look at the tech power up database. One thing that's, no matter what you think about the price of this card, which, everybody feels like it's too high. One thing that's really cool about this card is how much performance it brings versus the amount of power it uses. Okay, here you go. We don't actually have to log into this page. The total design power for a 4070 Ti, the reference 4070 Ti, is 285 watts. Okay, so when I see 272 here, we're not actually even hitting the reference total design power. So we've got to figure that out, right? It should be using more power already, right? Out of the box, being such a high-end model, it should be using more power. Part of me is wondering if it's on a silent BIOS or something like that. Yeah, we'll take a look later if we can't figure it out. But anyways, so now we know that we should be, I fully expected uncapping the power limit would take us over 300 watts. So let's try to figure out why that didn't happen. Let's start with a conservative 100 megahertz. Most cards can do 100 megahertz on the core clock, right? So I'm going to hit apply here. We should see this number go up by 100. There you go. We went from 2805 to 2895. So we can see here that we were at 2805. We're bumped up to 2895 now. Board power draw still in the 270 watt range. All right, you know what? Let's loop the other benchmark. Part of me is really feeling like Speedway is not taxing the GPU the way that we would want. So times by extreme, run stress test. This is going to run at 4K natively. So maybe that will mean a huge increase in power draw. It's hard to say.
We're about to
until we
find
do
out.
it. Probably my least favorite part of 3D Mark is how long it takes to actually start a benchmark after you hit go. Especially given how, we're working with fast PCIe 4.0 storage, a fast CPU. It feels like a loading screen in a game.
That PCI storage, is that the same type of storage that they've got in the modern consoles, the PS5 and
So the PS5 expansion storage is PCIe 4.0.
Okay.
I don't know if I believe the internal storage is different. So, okay. So where are we at here? Temperatures in the 69 range, up to 69.
Nice.
Hotspot did, very nice. Hotspot does creep up to 83 actually, which is interesting. Total board power draw at 285. So to test if this power limit thing is even working, I'm going to lower it below 100. We're going to see what happens. Lower it below 100. Immediately drop down to 240. Did you see that? Now we're in the 250s. Fascinating. All right, let's go back up. Okay, so we actually have, down here, we have this performance cap reason on the NVIDIA cards here that right now shows VREL, which we looked that up right before this, and I don't remember what it was. Voltage reliability, I think it is. So it could actually be that we need to undervolt to achieve higher power draw.
How does that work? That seems counterintuitive.
I should have a concise way of explaining that. But all I can say is voltage is the metric that determines wattage. So there's a mathematical way of looking at it, right? Where, if it uses 250 watts at 1 volt, if now we're talking about 9.5 or 950 millivolts, right? If it can hit the same speed, which is like a property of the chip, right, it will do so at less wattage.
Okay.
So I'm seeing GPU voltage at 1.1, which feels a little high to me, honestly, right here at this range. So honestly, it's the way to lower this curve that I had already practiced, and now I forgot the hotkeys on the spot. Gotta love that. So I guess I'll just look it up. Afterburner curve header hotkeys. Control F opens the menu. Control L lock voltage and frequency to the highlighted dot. Tab control up and down. Okay. So control L is what we need to know here. That locks it. Okay. Shift left click. Shift left click and move the entire curve. Control left click on dot. That moves the whole curve. There's a way to set way to set everything to this curve. Is it left click? Move entire curve. Make gradually increasing curve. There's a way to force all of these guys to go down that I would have expected to find really quickly. So lock voltage at frequency. Okay, so you can reduce the curve here. Control F, here it is. Okay. Point still selected after dragging it, press L.
Got Michael in the chat saying that benchmark tool is rad.
Yeah, 3D Mark is awesome, honestly. Big fan. L, apply. L and apply. Nope, it's not doing anything. Like the point you just adjusted. That's because we locked the voltage. It will unlock it again. All right. Cool. So I think we know what we need to do here. We're running at 1100, so you have voltage along the bottom here. We're running 1100, so 1.1 volts, and you have frequency here. We don't actually hit these levels, 2940, because we don't hit this voltage, right? So it's just a curve. Where we actually are living here is at this 1100 millivolts that is apparently set to 2850. So what we want to do is try to undervolt and overclock. So by running a 50 millivolt difference, for example, let's say we try 2900, right? And we lock it there, and we hit OK. So now we've bumped that point up, right? Our goal is to run at 2900 megahertz at a voltage of 1.05 volts instead of 1.1. So I'll leave the curve editor here, and 3D Mark flipped out a little bit when I did that. So apologize. I'm gonna have to kill it here.
So for your PC for Life PCs, do you plan on overclocking them, or is that upon something you can do upon request?
That's a great question. We haven't really discussed much about that internally, right? So I think it's possible that we do that. It's possible that we offer that as well. But right now, you know, most cards don't. Most situations don't need an overclock. This is more of a fun thing that you can do. We don't live in a time when you can go get 20, 30, 40% from an overclock anymore, right? It's always going to be. All right, 3D Mark. We might have to restart the machine because it says it's already running, even though it's definitely not running. Try one more time. 3D Mark, stop. That's why. Steam still has it running. Let's give it a second to see if it stops here, and we don't have to restart. So a couple of major differences, right, between overclocking this card and overclocking the RX 7900 XT. When you uncap the power limit on an AMD card, you see an immediate change to its boost algorithms and speeds, right? It's less tightly controlled and more user configurable. I was very surprised that the GPU did not change speeds when we uncapped its power limit by 28%, right? What's 28% of what is 28% of 285 watts? So that's 1.28, right? Theoretically, the card could use up to 364 watts, which is crazy, but power didn't even move. Nothing changed, right? Even though we said, we told the card, hey, go ahead and use up to 300 plus watts, right? And that's one of the reasons that this card came with the triple cable, right? The triple 8-pin adapter is because it has the capability of using a lot of power like that. Wow, now Steam is just really struggling here. Come on, Steam. 3D Mark. You're embarrassing me in front of my friends. Yeah, it looks like we're just going to have to restart. No way around it. Oh. Well, it still thinks 3D Mark is running. So, quick restart.
How long it takes for this machine to reboot.
Hey, there you go. So just for some extra context for the chat, what we are running right now here is an Intel i5 13600K with a dual tower air cooler, the Deepcool AG620. And you can see the dope LED dragon. So it's the Z690 Gaming Edge Wi-Fi motherboard. 32 gigabytes of DDR5, 6000 megahertz. I think it's CL36 RAM. And then the RTX 4070 Ti MSI SUPRIM X, as well as two separate 2 terabyte M.2 NVMe's, both PCIe Gen 4. So one of them is QLC for storage, though. Go ahead. Toss your pin in there. I'll hold the camera for you without looking at your pin. Here, we'll take a look at the computer here. There you go. All right. Let's get everything launched here. 3D Mark. Yes. Sure, let's install GPU-Z. Didn't think I would need to because I didn't think I'd need to restart. And then let's bring up our friend MSI Afterburner. All right, so our voltage, our curve was not saved. So we're going to go back to 1050 millivolts. And I'm going to adjust the curve to be 2900 at 1050 millivolts. All right, so our goal here is to run at a higher resolution or a higher frequency while running at a lower voltage. So in theory, consuming less power to do so. And you can see actually that the core clock switches to be curve edited. We'll launch GPU-Z so we can get an idea of what's going on here. Perfect. Feel like I can't fit everything I want in here, so CPU temperature we don't need though. So right there, GPU voltage is the last thing we need. Okay. Stress test. We're gonna run times by extreme. We're gonna see. I mean, it's possible that it crashes right now, right? It's hard to know for sure. How do I edit the fan curve on this? Prioritize. Power and temperature limit. Adjustment. That.
And how big of an adjustment did you just do there? Is it fairly sizable, or are you just going up by small increments?
Well, we know the card was running at 1.1 volts previously. That feels high to me, but you know, I don't have a ton of overclocking experience. So, that feels like a safe initial change for me to make. And we'll see. I mean, we know the GPU runs at about 2805 megahertz. So you'll notice that it's actually running at 2865. So it's not reaching the speed that I set it to reach. But that said, it's using 250 watts and reaching a higher speed than it ran before. So hard to say for sure. But one of the perks of undervolting, right, is our hotspot temperature is down about 5 degrees Celsius from 80. From the high 70s to 80 range to low 70s to mid 70s. So that's pretty cool. Why don't we give it another try here? Let's go up to 2950, lock it, and apply. See if it crashes.
You can just do that mid-test. You don't have to relaunch it.
Exactly. So now we're up to 2925. Still not the exact speed that I wanted, but it is running at the voltage that I want it to run at, which is lower. Weirdly, though, this performance cap reason, I don't know what idle is supposed to mean, but it's definitely not reaching the power draw that it could. So actually, I realized that we didn't actually bump up the power limit. So let's go ahead and do that. You know what? I'm tempted actually to reset the curve. Well, no. Here's what I think. I think that uncapping the power limit now is going to have an impact, whereas it didn't before, because I think it was getting close to a temperature, a hotspot temperature that didn't like, so it wasn't drawing more power. We'll see. Once I hit apply here, you can take a look at this and see if that jumps up. I mean, 78. Don't know. It looks like the board power is still in the 250 watt range. So as we're going, I'm sort of discovering that the card is only going to do exactly what I tell it to and not do anything automatically, which is interesting, right? I mean, let's see what we can do with our current, you know, at 1050 millivolts. Let's see how high we can go. So let's jump up another 20 megahertz. Lock that and apply. It didn't work because it was locked. So let's go to 2960 megahertz. Lock it and apply. You saw that jump up to 2955. Hasn't crashed. So what that tells me is at this voltage, right, it's able to sustain these speeds at least in this load. So I feel like at the stock voltage we could probably do over 3000 megahertz, no problem. So I wouldn't be surprised if we could reach 3000 here as well. Let's try going to 2980. Actually, I didn't unlock it, so let's lock it here. 2985. It does go up in increments that are different than what I'm actually setting. So I set it to 2980. It applied 2985. So we're still running. Temperature's creeping up as we add more clock speed, right? Board power draw still in the 250 watt range. Kind of surprising to me. Maybe there's just something I'm missing, but let's keep going.
So let's say you were to accidentally fry your machine when you're doing this. I know it's not a huge risk, but does overclocking in any way void a manufacturer's warranty?
Yes. If they somehow knew you were overclocking, they would attempt to not replace your card. You see that? The second we put it at 3000 megahertz, stability was lost.
All right.
So
We've reached our upper limit.
we've reached our upper limit at this voltage. That's all we know so far.
Okay.
So surprisingly, the operating system didn't crash, just the benchmark crashed, which I find to be fascinating. But what we're going to do is we're going to actually lower this back down to 2980. Why is that at 3015 still? 2980 was our last stable. And we're going to go back into our stress test. So what we can do next is actually step up to 1075, which is still an undervolt, but a smaller undervolt.
Where did we start with voltage?
We didn't technically start anywhere, but the card I noticed was running at 1100 millivolts.
Okay.
Like consistently, right? This number was not changing. So as it gets going here, see we're in the 60s for frame rate. If I were to reset everything, we would see a change here. But whether that changes up or down, I'm not sure. Let's go ahead and reset. Now it's back down to 2805 megahertz. I feel like I saw a slight FPS drop, right? The clock speeds weren't very different. And we haven't even touched memory, which is where I think we're going to get the majority of our improvements here.
Good.
So let's try what we were going to do here. Let's find 1070, and let's bump it up to 3000 at 1075. Hit apply. So this is where we started losing some stability before. Still good. Let's bump up the power limit, keeping an eye here. Once I apply, that was a change actually. It bumped up the power draw by a little bit, which is good. I'm going to reset this. I don't know. Perf cap reason of idle seems very weird to me. So we were getting good performance cap stuff before. How finicky. I just crashed the benchmark by relaunching Tech Power or GPU-Z. This likely means we'll have to restart. Yeah, it's all struggling. Close all windows. Nope. All right, let's just do it now instead of later. Save ourselves some time. I got this for you. How's man in the camera going?
It's going all right.
Good. Here's a quick look at Chris.
Nah, you don't want to see that.
All right. We'll look at the GPU then and the build. Note to self: don't touch anything when the benchmark is running. All right. Go. MSI, Afterburner, Z, and 3D Mark. Curve editor. So we were stable at that curve, which is good, I think. Oh, interesting. Look at this. GPU voltage is at 0.88 right now. So it's actually fluctuating now, which is cool, I think.
Okay.
Previously, it was just locked at 1.1. I don't know why. And honestly, ever since I installed GPU-Z, the perf cap reason is set to idle. So something fishy going on there. It's no longer giving us useful information about what is capping the performance. So we're gonna go back to, was it Port Royal? No, Speedway. We're gonna run the Speedway stress test instead. So I wasn't actually seeing any different power draw on the 4K native one. So let's just stick with Speedway. Who knows? I mean, truthfully, the answer here could be that the performance of the card is very near what its capability is out of the box, right? So that's sort of what we're trying to discover by doing this. But let's go back to our 1075 millivolts and bump it up to 3000. Lock it. And accept. An error occurred. What happened? Why didn't it run? Probably me just editing the voltage curve.
If somebody's interested in learning how to overclock, how did you go about learning that? Are there resources out there? You just pick up little things here and there.
I think the best way to do it is to find tutorials on YouTube. I'm not going to brand this video a tutorial because in some ways I am learning on the NVIDIA side where I had more familiarity on the AMD side. The one thing I am finding fascinating about this is in scenarios, for example, I previously had a 3090 that I didn't really ever try to overclock. In scenarios like this, when I would uncap the power limit, the card actually would go from 350 watts to 400 watts just immediately. So I found that to be interesting, that nothing happens when we uncap the power today. There's a small chance that it's actually an afterburner problem. Like the power limit isn't really doing anything because development on Afterburner has apparently stopped because the developer is in Russia and MSI can't pay him. So I don't know exactly what's going on there, but let's keep an eye on here. So 265 is what we're capped out at on board power draw. Once I uncap, we see a very slight increase, I guess. So there was something there, right? 273. We both saw it. But then it's kind of back down to the 260s. So I don't really know. And our performance cap reason still has nothing. Interestingly, we are running at 1075 watts. We're up to 2970 on the clock speed, which is good. Let's go to 3020, lock, and apply. All right, there it is. 3015 megahertz and crash. Wow. Not very forgiving now, are we? Crazy. Let's reset. And let's restart the test. Now, instead of undervolting and overclocking, I'm going to leave the voltage curve as is, and we're simply going to add to the core clock. So whatever the card thinks it needs to reach the core clock that will, incrementally raise, we'll see, right? We may see the voltage go up, we may see the voltage go down. Let's just see, right? At the stock voltages, there is a core clock limit that we need to sort of establish and then move on to memory clock. And it could be that there's not a lot of undervolting gains to be had here. I've always known that there wasn't as much available on the undervolting for NVIDIA as there is for AMD cards. The AMD cards tend to be a little bit overvolted, right? So in this case, undervolting might be a way for you to achieve, 97% of the performance at 100 watts less, right? So we'll have to see. But here we are at our, same parameters, right? We're running at a hotspot of mid 70s, 2805 GPU clock speed. Let's start with 150 added to the core clock. So you'll notice that shifted the whole curve up by 150. And we're going to hit apply. So that takes us to 2955. And we should max out our power limits. I forgot to do that again. Okay, here we go. We're finally hitting 280. Right, that's because we haven't done anything with voltage. So, here we go. Now we can see that voltage, I think VREL is voltage reliability, is the performance cap reason. So that's what, it doesn't seem to be boosting, right? It never changes the boost speed. It's just fixed. So rather than dynamically boosting according to what it can do, it's just sitting there, which is kind of why I've decided to go about it this way. But let's try 175. I think we're getting close to crashing here, although we are at a higher voltage. So
is the goal right now to make it crash?
the goal is to find where it crashes. Because once you find where it crashes, if you back off a little bit below that, in theory, you found, a maximum stable overclock. So
how much of a buffer do you want to give yourself?
That depends, right? In a synthetic benchmark, it's probably different than The Witcher 3 or Cyberpunk, right? So for the purposes of our test right now, we're going to back off, 20 megahertz probably, and run it again and, see if it works. So 175 appears to be stable, right? No immediate crashes. Let's try 200. That will take us, this one's going to be close, I think. 3,000 megahertz exactly. But you can see the entire voltage curve has shifted up, right? So we are running at 1100 millivolts. That appears to be stable at, I didn't want to change it, whatever it was before. Yeah, I'm not gonna change it. So we're at 200 here. Yeah, 3,000, 1100 millivolts, 3,000 megahertz. That's where we're at on the curve right now. We look at board power draw. We're in the 280s consistently now, which is, a good sign. There's some power there to be used. Let's try 220. Remember, we are at a higher voltage, so that's why we've been able to hit these speeds. And never mind. Okay, so I'm pretty confident that 3,000 megahertz is not a speed that a clock speed this card can hit without overvolting. And overvolting is not what we want to be doing. That is the thing that can damage your card, right? So I think 2980 is where we're going to run for a bit here and kind of see if it stays stable at that value for a little bit. That was 180, I believe, right? Have a seat, my friend. So we've tested at 3 different voltages, right? Which was helpful, I think. Gave us some context as to where the card is at. Not a ton of performance on the table at lower voltages is what we've learned. There's about 150 to 180 megahertz on the core clock that we can get at stock voltages. 200 is too much, right? We start at 2805. 200 takes us to 3000. We've crashed at 3000. An error has occurred. It would be dope if we could restart the benchmark, but once you crash, right, graphics drivers can crash. You can have a problem. We might have to restart one more time. Let's see here.
You lost all your viewers when you put me on camera.
It's all good. When it comes to this stuff, it's not just the live viewers. Hoping to put this out there and help prospective 4070 Ti builders, or not builders, buyers, to sort of understand what the card is capable of, right? Specifically this model, or generally most 4070 Ti's are in the same range, right? There's this element called the silicon lottery. Some people just get golden samples that are able to run at higher clock speeds and lower voltages and just overclock better than others. But most people are sort of in this, normally distributed curve. They're somewhere in the middle, right? And so the high-end cooler generally helps you get a little bit more out of the card. So here we are running at 2985 for reference, right, 2805 was the default boost clock for the card. That's what we were running at before. So 2985 is 180 megahertz higher. So it is going through the benchmark without crashing. Usually by this point we've crashed. So that's a good sign. We'll see if it makes an entire loop, and then we'll just call it good for the GPU clock speed.
Is there another clock speed that you can tinker with?
Next, we're going to tinker with the memory clock speed.
Okay.
So there's probably more gas in the tank there. NVIDIA uses a type of memory called GDDR6X, very fast memory. I believe Micron is the manufacturer. That they have a couple of different speeds they run the different cards at. Right. For example, the 3090 had slower GDDR6X than the 3090 Ti. It can be clocked at different speeds. So
is this the VRAM?
This is the VRAM. Yep. The VRAM has its own clock speed.
Does VRAM differ from regular RAM?
The main difference, speeds, right? So regular RAM is called DDR, right? Double data rate RAM, and it'll run at 6,000 megahertz, right? In this case, which is, the fastest it's been in a long time. For a long time, we were in the 3,200 megahertz range with CPUs, but GDDR6 can run at 24 gigabits per second. So those aren't directly comparable, but you can see the clock speed here reflected on Afterburner is 10,501 megahertz. It's a lot faster, right? And therefore much more suitable for a GPU situation. Because there's an element here called bandwidth, right? So you have the chip, and then the chip has a throughput, and then the chip also receives information that's limited by the traces on the circuit board, right? There's bandwidth there. So the more memory modules you have, the wider the bus, right? And that the speed of the memory and the width of the bus together can be used to calculate a bandwidth figure. So, for example, the 4090 with 24 gigabytes of memory has a much wider bus because that's 2 gigabyte chips that each have their own interface to the graphics card. So you end up with much more bandwidth. Graphics card manufacturers are always trying to balance, right? How much bandwidth is needed for this chip? So if you took the 4070 Ti and you threw a bunch more memory on it and increased the bandwidth, the performance would probably actually increase as long as the chip needed more bandwidth. The chip could benefit from more bandwidth. Okay, I think we're good. We're on loop number 4, 2985. That's our speed right there. 180 on the core clock. Let's start playing with the memory. So most of these cards can do quite a bit on the memory. So we're going to start with 500 megahertz and hit OK. Very interesting here. Our first over the reference TDP. I saw 295 watts. Okay. So we're still running stable. I'm gonna put this back down to 0, right? Take a look at the FPS. Okay, so we're in the 55 range. When we throw in another 500 megahertz, right now I'm seeing 53 apply, immediate 54 to 55, right? 56. So it's running a little faster. I think we can probably get away with 300 megahertz more. Let's try that. There we go. Power draw up to 292 watts consistently now. I think we can also get away with 1,000. There it is. You can see the memory speed creeping up here. Up to 11,501. And crash. Very interesting to note there that the GPU speed actually went over 3,000 on the crash. So I don't actually know if it was the memory there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reset the curve. We're going to restart the test, and we're going to overclock the memory 1,000 megahertz and see if it crashes. Because it could be that our core clock was just a little bit too high.
Okay. How much VRAM did you say is in this? This
is a 12 gigabyte card. There's a nice history I feel like PC gamers aren't going to forget about this for a while. But NVIDIA actually announced an RTX 4080 16 gig and an RTX 4080 12 gig. This card was previously branded the RTX 4080 12 gig. They were so close to launch that they weren't able to change anything except the name. So they dropped the price $100 and changed the name to 4070 Ti. It is a different chip entirely. Totally different chip, different RAM, therefore different bandwidth, right? They cannot be placed in the same class no matter what. So for NVIDIA to brand them both as 4080s was highly, highly suspect at best. There was really no justifying it. All right, so we're back in the benchmark. Let's overclock the memory to 1000 megahertz and see if we're stable. My hunch is that we are stable. And if we are stable, we're going to overclock the core to 170. We're going to back down 10 megahertz from the 180 that eventually resulted in a crash. One thing that's very unique is this cutting edge VRAM memory type, right, uses a lot of energy. That's why you see the board power just rocket up when you start adding to the memory clock. The chip itself is actually very efficient. NVIDIA went from, an inferior Samsung node, they call it, for the architecture for the 3000 series to a cutting edge TSMC 4 nanometer node. In doing so, right, they were able to bring 3090 Ti level performance to this way lower power usage. So I think we're good there. We're already on the second loop. So we're going to go 170 on the core clock and hit apply. Let's see. We were running at 2980 previously, right? Now we're running at 2970. So backed off just a little bit there. Let's try 1100 on the video memory. That appears to be acceptable. We are about to go over 300 watts on power draw. All right, after 1200 megahertz, we're going to go up in 50 megahertz increments because I think, I really have no idea how to predict how much more we are going to use here, but 1200 was accepted. All right. So here's actually what I want to do. I would like to run the benchmark now with this profile. Now that we're overclocked, right? Mm-hmm. Core clock and memory clock are higher. We're using more power. Performance has theoretically increased. So we're actually gonna just run a quick benchmark to see where we're at. Speedway doesn't take very long to run. We've been looping it. We know it's probably going to complete that one run successfully.
So what's the difference between the stress tests and the benchmarks?
Benchmark runs one time and gives you a score.
Gotcha.
Stress test loops it. So it just allows you to experiment with your settings as you're going through. So this is where we find out if we're already close to 6,000 points, right? You just don't really know what the performance difference is going to be without actually running the test again. So this is the big moment right here. If we're already close to 6,000 somehow, that means we're within spitting distance of the record.
All right.
Although, I don't know. I feel like we're probably not going to be that close. We'll probably got 300 to 500 points is my guess. We'll see, though. As you can see, we're definitely running at higher speeds on both GPU and memory through this run. Come on, Supreme X. Take your rightful place on the throne. I would love to deliver Huguenot a world record overclock today.
A world-class machine.
Almost there. What do you think? What's your guess?
I think we're going to end up slightly under the record.
I think we're going to end up at like 57 to 5,800.
that a crash or was that the end?
That was the end.
That was the end. All right. Moment of truth. Here we go.
Or maybe it was an error because it says
occurred.
no score. Come on, man. That's when it ends, isn't it?
And that's when it has ended. Maybe we keep getting the same crash over and over again.
That's weird. Let's run it one more time. If we're crashing, if we're legitimately crashing at the very end, it's got to be the core clock again. It simply is not going to be. I don't think it's the memory. But maybe we need to back off another 10 megahertz on the core clock. Who knows? At this point, we are forging an intimate relationship with our SUPRIM X friend over here. We know all about its ability to overclock and where its weaknesses lie. For example, we know that it cannot do 3000 megahertz, at least at stock voltages. Oh, it does seem like an accelerated benchmark, does it not?
Yeah.
Maybe that's the speed part. I mean, it doesn't feel unstable. There's no artifacting, right? Sometimes when you reach a point where it's not fully unstable, but there's a problem, you'll see like some different discoloration on the screen. It's called artifacting.
Mm-hmm.
We're not seeing any of that here.
So it was the same spot it ended on last time.
An error occurred. All right, before I give up on this, I'm going to relaunch 3D Mark. Because, you know, we actually had an actual crash previously, right? So maybe it's just a 3D Mark software issue. In the meantime, I'm going to CarMax up. If it doesn't run, if we have the same error, we're going to back off on both the core clock and the memory clock. So 200 megahertz on the memory, 10 megahertz on the core clock, just to see. Come on, SUPRIM. Wow, it's already 11.
I was just looking down here and I thought that was the time. 12:50.
This is just got a message that says you really misled me from my wife when I told her that we would be done by now. So maybe a part 2, I don't know. Maybe this will be a world record run. We don't know.
I'm not leaving here until we break this record. Donna's just gonna have to live with that.
Yeah. I wonder if Lenovo Legion sponsored part of this, because you see their logo all over this.
Yeah.
Right here. Here. Count the number of Legion logos.
Detailed world here.
One thing I did want to point out for any viewers is there is a free version of 3D Mark. I'm not sure which benchmark it is. I think it might be TimeSpy, but there is a free version that can be downloaded on Steam where you can run some of your own testing without actually buying it. My favorite part of that is that that comment is immortalized in this video forever. There we go. It was 3D Mark. We have a score, 5,878. The average is 5,442. So what does that mean? We're close. We are close. How much more memory do we really have in the tank, though, is the question. So let's go back to our stress test. Let's give it another 100 megahertz on the memory. Let's go back to our stress test, and let's find that last thing we do tonight, I think, is we find that memory clock limit.
Okay.
I swear you only got here like an hour and a half ago, and it's like, 9:30.
There was a lot of setup.
There was a lot of setup. That's on me. But you know what? When we finish this room, there won't be as much setup.
So
That's a guarantee to myself, most importantly, but also to my wife and to anybody else that I rope into doing this with me.
it's all part of the process.
All right.
The results speak for themselves.
We're going through here. We're going through. We don't have any crashes yet on the memory. We're going to bump up another 50 megahertz to 1350 here. No crashing there. We are definitely very close to 300 watts on the power draw. Admittedly, I gotta say, I am disappointed that they allow this slider to be moved up 28% and that it barely goes up. Okay, 1350 seems to be stable. 1400. There's a 300 watts. We're starting to see 300 watts more consistently. Honestly, we have an 850 watt gold power supply here, Corsair RMX. We have no power constraints here. So if I could get the car to use 400 watts, I would. Without, blowing it up, obviously. 1450. Test. Looks like that works. 1500. I'd really like to see this FPS number never drop below 60. That would be satisfying.
So when you're looking at the world record, are you able to drill in and see exactly what they are, what their hardware is, what their settings were? Is all that data available to you?
Some of that data is available to us. For example, the person with the top 25 scores had a 13900K, right? So different CPU. But this is a graphics only benchmark, so that's probably not affecting the score much, if at all. Depends on whether there's any CPU bottlenecking occurring there. I feel like probably not, right? This is a very detailed benchmark. Frame rates are low, right? It's unlikely that CPU bottlenecking is really occurring. We could actually tell here by looking at GPU utilization. We have that here. GPU load, 100%. So that tells us that it's not the CPU failing to give the frames to the GPU, right? In time. Let's try 1600. We're up in the 303 watt range. No crash yet. 1650. Still going. 1700. If we see a huge drop in FPS, that's another sign that we've reached a place of instability, right? Here we go, 1700. All right, everything's good. One of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out exactly how the memory speed reflected in Afterburner computes relative to, that gigabit per second speed that the memory is rated at when, NVIDIA announces the card. Because, maybe we haven't even reached 3090 Ti levels of memory yet. We definitely could, right? I could have jacked this up even higher. I don't know. 1750. Here goes nothing. Still working. 305 watts. That's a new high, I would say. Yep. We're not seeing any artifacting or anything like that. Still running smoothly. Let's try 1800. See, this is much more satisfying. Feels like we've been able to keep going and going and going on the memory clock. 1850 coming right up. We're at 307 watt high now. Oh,
There it is.
I shouldn't have said anything. Okay. So it looks like 1800 is our number, potentially, right? We might be able to get an 1825. I did jump up 1850. But let's run our benchmark at 170 megahertz on the core clock, 1800 megahertz on the memory clock. Are we ready?
Let's do it.
This looks like the final run of the night. Get us over 6,000.
What was the high score again?
The high score was 6,300.
63. Okay, so we still got a ways to go.
We've got a ways to go, but I'm fairly confident we're going to get over 6,000.
And we started at what, 5,300?
Yeah. So we've already gone up about 5,400. So we've almost 500 points increase so far. If we get another 200 points, that takes us over 6,000. We might be on the first page. We'll see. We'll see. Also, maybe I should have relaunched 3D Mark because we might have that error at the end.
Geralt will thank you for your efforts.
Geralt should thank me for my efforts. Geralt should look great in QD OLED 3440 by 1440 HDR glory. I've been very tempted recently by the new LG 240 Hz 1440p OLED monitor. Even though it's lower resolution, right, and I wanted to experience 4K HDR gaming, it's hard to beat, basically instant response times and great color, right? I've heard it's a pretty dim monitor, though, so kind of waiting for a little bit more on the review side before I decide to go with it for sure. That's a little bit of a regression for sure. So that didn't work. So turns out 1800 is not stable. So we're going to try 1775. Sometimes that can happen, right? Where something that was stable before you can have a little bit of a regression like that. Let's give it a try at 1775. Maybe I should have made it 1776 just, for America's sake. All I can think about when I see the number 1776 now is Hamilton music, so. This is the run for all the marbles.
We're not giving away your shot.
Exactly. Donna's not praying for a world record. She is praying for a final run. Shout out to Donna, though, for letting me do stuff like this and pursue what I've long wanted to do. Benchmark's about 45 seconds long, right? Happy to see we're running at 300 watts. I did watch a video about 4070 Ti overclock that kind of noted that there wasn't that much on the core clock. There wasn't that much on and that the memory was better as well. So I think we're having kind of a standard experience overclocking this card. Looks like we might make it to the end of this run. Knock on wood.
This is the run.
We're almost there. Yeah, it's a 60-second benchmark. That's what it is. All right, give us a score. Come on. Hey, no error. Legendary, 6,049 points. Look at that. Compare result online. Where does that put us?
Donna's prayers were quite efficacious.
Okay. All right. So let's take a look here. We had 6,049, right? So 3D Mark results. Let's do a quick search for the 4070 Ti. Shout out to NVIDIA's announcer guy. Speedway. That's what we did, right? There it is.
Wow.
Number 63, Brada. Let's look at the best one. So the CPU clock was higher. The GPU core clock, this person ran at 3150. And a GPU memory clock of 1533. So I don't actually know exactly how that computes, right? But let's look at what our memory clock was by comparison. 1535. So memory clock about the same. Where they gain that extra score over us is they are able to run the GPU at a higher core clock. I mean, it's possible if we increase the voltage that we could actually have achieved that, right? But that's not something that I'm willing to do for the sake of a record, where that can actually hurt the lifespan of the card. So, all in all, well done. We're in the top 100. SUPRIM, you performed great. Any last questions, Chris? Or any last comments?
Nope.
Obviously, we hope you enjoy your machine. You and I can stay in contact about, how we can back off the overclock to be something you could actually use in games, right? There's some testing to be done here to ensure that it's not just stable in synthetic benchmarks, but that in a variety of different games, it's going to work well. So thanks for coming. Thanks for being behind the camera. Really appreciate having you here. And also, thanks for letting me build your machine.
Anytime.
All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you. And where's my mouse? There we go.